The Nets have hired a new head coach, and it's Hall of Fame point guard Steve Nash. Adrian Wojnarowski reporting this news. It's a 4-year deal for Nash. Interim coach Jacques Vaughn will stay on as an assistant.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Graybeards podcast. It's your boy Mo Profit in the building. And as always, I got my big little bro in the house, T-Prop. I got my man Seth in the building. You guys know him as Sojo. And of course, we got everybody's favorite, my man Keith, KJ, the antithesis. What's good, fellas?
What's going on? What's going on? Let's get it.
And we talked a little bit about this off wax, but it became a major story with the Steve Nash hiring with the Brooklyn Nets. And you had a lot of the talking heads on TV, prominent guys like Stephen A. Smith saying it's white privilege. You had Charles Barkley saying it's not white privilege. We've seen this happen before. But again, it was an interesting story that took a life of its own. In particular, because it was Steve Nash, because it was Brooklyn Nets, because it was big personalities like Kyrie and KD. But what did you guys think of all the chatter around the Steve Nash hire?
Nothing. I didn't think anything. I thought it was Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving wanted Steve Nash. If they wanted a black coach would be coaching them. Like to me, this had nothing to do with racial lines, anything of that tone. I get it. He's a first-time coach and he hasn't have any coaching experience, but this simply came down to who Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving wants. They wanted somebody else that would have had them.
Yeah, I'm glad I didn't go first on that question. First of all, I didn't want to put myself out there like that right off the jump, but I agree with T. It didn't seem like anything more than that to me. Players have a lot of influence. KD and Kyrie Irving certainly have a lot of influence. And, when they're sitting around and they're talking privately and, in any meetings they have, and they're talking about guys that they want involved in the program, and, they're going to be decision makers in that decision. And I think because of the relationship that Nash had with both of those guys, that's the direction that the Brooklyn Nets decided to go into. And it's not anything strange for the Brooklyn Nets. The Brooklyn Nets, have done that before. They hired Jason Kidd 9 days after he retired. So that's a move that the Brooklyn Nets have made in the past. So it wasn't anything that was like shocking like it was to other people like we've heard in the media.
See, for me, it's like, I agree with y'all, but not for the same reason. You know what I mean? I always say when you play the race card, you better make sure it's the high joker. When you play the race card, you better make sure nothing possibly can beat it. No argument against it. In this case, the race card was played, but it wasn't a definite book. That's a Spades reference if y'all don't understand that. If y'all don't know shit. If you've never ever been to a black cookout, that's a Spades reference. Now,
he's the only one that plays spades, but
I don't know who's listening. We might have some folks that don't play spades. I ain't just doing this for y'all.
Touche.
Now, I can make the argument that the Nets just fired a white coach. How in the world can now hiring a white coach be about privilege? I can also argue that plenty of black coaches are hired with no experience, which is the symbol, which why would this one now be a symbol of privilege? I don't understand that. I can also argue that the relationships is the reason why this hire happened. Not just the relationship between Nash and Kyrie and KD, but also the relationship between Nash and Steve and Sean Marks. They played together back in Phoenix. So it could be relationships. It could be they had, the other black coaches have been hired, as well as they just fired a white coach to hire another white coach. How in the world? So if I got three arguments that could argue against white privilege in the race card, then that race card wasn't the high joker. And that's what I always say. If you're going to play the race card, make sure it's the high joker. And in my opinion, it wasn't in this case.
And there's also out of those coaches that, were hired right after after playing or with no head coaching experience, there haven't been a ton, but there's been a few that had like early success right in their first year, and so it's not, again, this thing that's so striking or it's like, oh, these head coaches that are hired with no experience haven't also had success. Some of them have.
So I agree with all you. I disagree with all you guys on a number of different levels. So give me a minute. Number one, I'm not going to take away from the fact that we've seen this before, meaning forget color, point guards and guards in particular get hired without experience. Have we seen that before? We absolutely have. Have we seen people get hired based on relationships in particular in these positions? We absolutely have. where my issue is not about even Steve Nash. If you remember many episodes ago, we battled about Tom Thibodeau, and this is more egregious of a hire from a race perspective than Tom Thibodeau. And I'll give you, and I'll tell you guys why from my perspective. Number one, Keith, you and I, we've known each other a long time. You've been consistent in saying, if you're going to play the race card, have the big joker. I am so opposed to that context because that's, again, putting the pressure on the oppressed to have a solution. That's like when the NBA players had to strike and we're like, we want you guys to strike and had a solution. Statistics show when more often than not, situations like that are racial. You know how much we still have to hear about that Duke case because it was the one time where it was a mistake by a white prosecutor that wanted to make his name and people throw that in our face like, see, this is why you can't jump to conclusions. Most of the time it is racial. And if you put the pressure on a black person to not play the race card, and say you only have the big joker, that's adding to the stress of being black. Because now not only if in my gut tells me it's race and I say it's race and it's not the big joker, I'm completely opposed to that. But let's bring it back to Steve Nash. The reason I have an issue with the Steve Nash hire is not about Steve Nash. It's about process and systems. The thing that we keep talking about right now with this is systemic racism, systemic oppression. If you don't, the NFL gets polarized, is polarizing about the Rooney Rule. But what the Rooney Rule still does is allow you to feel what it's like to interview for a head coaching position. The reason that you need to have these systems in place is that people need to feel what it's like to have the opportunity. Because if you move down the line, whether it's Sam Cassell, Alan Griffith, Ime Udoka, if they interview for those positions, even if you're going to hire Steve Nash, people want to go, that's token. It's not token because you need opportunity. And now Sean Marks is a resource for somebody else to say, hey, I interview Alan Griffith. You guys need to give this guy a look. You guys need to give him a shot. We get the track record of this being done before, but we're in the middle of 2020 where there are nationwide protests, where people are trying to figure out how to get more diversity. And we just say, here's another opportunity. And people can say, well, if you're going to hire Steve Nash, why put people through the process? Because the process and the systems matter. I can tell you as somebody that's hired, fired, and been on the other side of it. The process, exposure, and systems matter. So I don't agree with Stephen A. Smith's white privilege. Let me be clear on that. I don't agree with that, the white privilege. We want to be completely clear on that. But I do feel like it was an issue about the process and system because this is how you get opportunities for people of color. That's just my take, and I'm passionate about it.
I got a couple of things I want to say because you mentioned my point by name. So when I say make sure you're playing a race card, what I'm trying to do is make sure that you don't leave anyone any wiggle room to say it's something else. Because when you do that, what you're doing is you're actually giving somebody an out. So it's not putting the onus on me, right? But if you play the race card and it's not definitive, like for instance, when I say you look at the difference between Blake and Rittenhouse, you look at between Blake and Rittenhouse.
Oh yeah, Kyle Rittenhouse, right? Yeah,
Blake shot in the back 9 times, no weapon. No weapon, in his back. Rittenhouse has a gun, walking by police, nothing happens. You can play the race card there because there's nothing else you can point to that can say, well, maybe it's this and maybe it's no, nothing else. To me, you play that card, it is the high joker. No one can say anything else. There's no other wiggle room around that. That matters. If
we're just going to agree to disagree, I'm not even going to fight you because we're going to agree to disagree because I've had too many instances of racism in my life where I can't be like, yep, it was racism, but I know it was racism.
I won't play it all the time. What I'll do is I'll start asking questions instead. If I know it's racism, but I know you can wiggle around it to say something else, I'll put the onus back on you.
I don't want to battle you on this, but that goes back to my point of putting the onus back on the person that had the racist act against them. The way you just said it is you now have the responsibility to ask questions. You got to dig a little deeper. When you know it was just racism.
Yeah, but just because you know it doesn't mean you can prove it. It's like a court of law is still you have to prove it. You can't just make a statement and not be able to prove. Hold on. And when you mentioned Tom Thibodeau, right? I'm sorry, Steph, I'll get to you. When you mentioned Tom Thibodeau, during that same conversation or debate we had about Thibodeau, you said, why not give someone else a chance? That was a quote. And I thought that comment was a little bit off kilter at the time. It's like, why not you can't just give it to someone else because you want to.
But I didn't say flippantly, but continue.
But at the same point in time, the Nets gave it, quote unquote, gave it to someone else. How do you now say you can't just give it to someone else? And then you were saying just give it to someone else. So it's either you have.
Hold on. Did you hear what I said? I didn't say just give it to Steve Nash. I specifically said process and systems. I said if you landed on Steve Nash. I didn't say give it to him. I specifically didn't say give it to him.
So, and I think that's the part, right? So until the NBA can across the board does due process when hiring coaches, you're always going to have these questions in that black spot, right? They need to do due process with everybody. As long as they allow the NBA to handpick coaches, you're always going to have this debate.